Hello, my name is Brian Smith and I research the Darwinian evolution of business models and competitive strategies in pharma, medtech and other biomedical industries. Today's masterclass is the sixth in a series of 7, all listed here. These masterclasses are designed for strategists who work in the pharma, medtech and other biomedical markets. And all of these masterclass presentations can be found on my YouTube channel. So please look at the others and share them with your colleagues. You can also find over 300 free PDFs on my website or listen to my work in my podcast. And if you want to talk about how my research can help your company in practice, how you can apply it, then please do get in touch. So what I'm going to cover today is based on my book, Brand Therapy, which is a manual for making strong strategies in pharma and medtech and related markets. Brand Therapy and all of my other books are available on Amazon and everywhere else. And although the material I covered here is partly based on academic research, it's also based on the hands-on work that I do when I apply this stuff in the real world with pharma and medtech companies. So this is our agenda for today. I'm going to ask these 3 questions and try to answer them in a way that is useful for you. You're probably most interested in the middle question, but the first question is necessary for you to understand the second question. And then the third question is important for you to understand the application of the second question. So please try to stick with me to the end if you can. I think the masterclass will last about 20 minutes or so. So SWOT originated in the work of several people. Nobody really knows who invented SWOT in the 1950s, 1960s. And it began with this recognition that any firm is a collection of assets, resources and capabilities. And no 2 firms are exactly the same collection of assets, resources and capabilities. Every firm is different from every other. Now, early researchers also recognized, of course, that every market is different from every other market. Each market differs in the number and types of customers, the numbers and types of its competitors, and in the surrounding sociological and technological environment. Also, all of these market factors are constantly changing, sometimes quickly and a lot, and sometimes slowly and only little. Now, some of these dynamic market factors that are changing make it easier for a firm to achieve its goals. For example, the emergence of a segment with unmet market needs. And some of these dynamic market factors make it harder for a firm to achieve their goals. For example, a strong competitor or a shrinking market segment. And then, of course, there was this third set of observations, which we now take as obvious, that some firms achieve better risk-adjusted return on investment than other firms, and the differences between firms vary over time. Now, researchers took all of these facts and then they started looking at firm strategy. And it's obvious, of course, that firms often choose different strategies. Even when they're in the same market, they choose to focus on different market segments within the market and to offer those segments different value propositions. So researchers took all of this stuff, put it together. And SWOT alignment came about when these management scientists tried to answer the question, why do some strategies work better than others? They found that it wasn't about the strategy. The same strategy can work well for some firms and not work for other firms. They found it wasn't about the firm. 2 similar firms can have very different results. And it wasn't about the markets. Some markets were successfully exploited easily by all firms. Others were a graveyard for everybody who tries to enter them. So if it wasn't about the strategy, and if it wasn't about the firm, and it wasn't about the market, then what was it that explained the differences between success and failure? Well, what became clear from this work was that strategy, that is your choice of what value propositions to offer to which customers, is an alignment process. What every firm is trying to do is align its unique combination of assets and resources and capabilities to the market's particular set of positive and negative factors. And when you do that alignment process better than your rivals do that alignment process, you create a better risk-adjusted return on investment. Now, this is so fundamental to SWOT and what we're going to be talking about today that I'm going to restate it just once more to make sure that I've got the message home. So success is associated with firms whose strategy, that is, whose choice of value proposition and what segments to target allows them to use their relative superiorities in assets or resources or capabilities, that is, their strengths, to exploit market factors, positive market factors that increase ROI, that is what we call opportunities. And their strategy also allows them to mitigate the relative inferiority in assets or resources or capabilities, that is, their weaknesses, in the face of market factors that potentially decrease their ROI. To simplify, successful strategies are those that enable firms to use their strengths to exploit market opportunities and to mitigate their weaknesses against threats. Excuse me. So, alignment between strengths and opportunities and between weaknesses and threats is one of the 5 critical characteristics of a strong strategy. If you want to know about the other 4, I recommend you watch the masterclass Strategy Diagnostics or talk to me offline. So, strong strategies are meant to create the conditions for SWOT alignment. And those conditions, that is, when the choice of target segment, the choice of value proposition create alignment, are known as critical alignment issues, or sometimes they're called critical success factors, but actually that's a misuse of the term. So critical success factors are often used to denote sub-objectives, and that gets confusing. It's technically wrong, it hinders the way you make strategy, but we don't have time to explore that today. So I'm going to stick with the term critical alignment issues. So what we need is a tool that identifies the conditions of critical alignment issues clearly and unambiguously and in a way that is specific for your business. And that's what SWOT alignment is for. It's a kind of processor, a kind of computer takes all the information you have about the market and your firm, put it in, you turn the handle, and out come the critical alignment issues that your strategy must enable. So there, that's the answer to your first question. SWOT is a tool for identifying the critical alignment issues between your firm's strengths and weaknesses and your market opportunities and threats. If you do this well and your strategy addresses those issues, then you are more likely to succeed. If you don't, then you're more likely to fail. It's as simple as that. So, having answered that question, I'm now going to move on to the second question about how you do SWOT in practice. The way you do SWOT in practice is best summarized as 3 golden rules. If you follow all 3 of those rules, you'll have an effective process that is very useful in practice. If you break any of these rules, you may have something that you call a SWOT, but in reality isn't a SWOT, and in practice doesn't help you. So I'm going to talk about how to adhere to all of these 3 golden rules. So golden rule 1 is about inputs. The inputs for SWOT come from the other analyses that you do. So the strengths and weaknesses come from comparing your firm to its rivals, and the opportunities and threats come from market analyses such as segmentation and competitive forces. So the process of doing SWOT usually begins by comparing the 2 competing entities. But the usual mistake that strategists make, especially in our industry, is that they tend to compare brands or products. But brands don't compete in the marketplace. It's companies that compete in the marketplace. Or, in fact, sometimes it's alliances between companies that compete against alliances between other companies. And that's why you need to use a chain like value chain comparison, which is a tool to identify where your company or where your alliance is superior relatively or relatively inferior to your competitor. Now, if you're doing your SWOT and you're only thinking about the strengths and weaknesses of your brand, then you're probably doing it wrong. And if you don't know how to do value chain comparison, then it's in the book, or please talk to me offline. I'll be delighted to explain it to you. Having done the internal analyses, then of course come the external market analyses. The goal here is to identify the market factors that either positively or negatively impact upon your ability to achieve your targeted ROI. Now, this always requires a battery of analyses to look at different things like customers and competitors and the wider market environment. But by the time you've done all of those, you should have a list of potential opportunities and threats, which, when you combine them with the potential strengths and weaknesses on the internal analyses, allow you start to become the inputs to your SWOT. Until you've done all of this work, you can't begin to think about doing SWOT because you don't have the right ingredients. It's like trying to make an omelette without making eggs, without breaking eggs. Many firms do it wrong. Many firms use SWOT as a standalone tool, divorced from the other analysis, disconnected from the other analyses. That simply doesn't work. Now, the second golden rule concerns what you do with those inputs. Because you need to remember that SWOT works a bit like a computer, garbage in, garbage out. And not everything that you identify in your internal and external market analyses will be valid inputs to your SWOT. Some of it will just be background data that's not relevant to the SWOT. And much of what you think is valid and relevant to the SWOT may be subjective or biased, so you need to fix that. The tool that we use for sorting the needles from the haystacks, as it were, is to apply a set of tests. These are known as reality filters. There's a different set of tests for each of these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And what these tests do is identify which of your things that you think are strengths really are strengths, which of the things you think are weaknesses really are weaknesses, what are the things you think are opportunities really are opportunities, and what really are threats. If you don't apply these tests, incidentally, it's almost impossible to get an effective SWOT. And the other advantage of applying them is that if, having applied them, you find that you don't have many valid factors to enter into your SWOT, then your alarm bell should ring, and it should tell you that your prior analyses, your internal and external analyses, weren't enough, weren't sufficient, and they need to be extended or improved. Now, there isn't time in this session to discuss the detail of the reality filters. Again, it's in the book, or you're very welcome to talk to me offline. So let's just recap here. Even if you want to do a SWOT, the first thing you have to do is to do your external and internal analyses first. Okay? And then you have to filter the results down to identify the valid inputs into your SWOT. It's only then that can you actually begin the SWOT alignment process. Now, the third golden rule of SWOT is to synthesize and then align. So your analyses will have identified probably a large number of potential strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and you'll have narrowed those down using the filters. But before you start trying to align them, you need to synthesize them into a smaller number of synthesized strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that combine together because they have a common effect. This is a synthesis process. For example, if you look at this example, you may have certain product claims, a certain brand reputation, and certain sales team capabilities that are superior, and they all have the same effect, a common effect, and making you stronger as a competitor in a certain segment, in this case, contextual segment X. If you don't know what a contextual segment is, by the way, look at the segmentation masterclass or give me a call. So in this case, 3 discrete separate strengths all have the same effect, and therefore they combine into one synthesized, validated strength, validated by Vario. In this case, it's about your strength for competing in contextual segment X. The same thing happens in opportunities. For example, in this case, 3 discrete opportunities all have the same common effect of causing, in this case, contextual segment X to grow, which is an opportunity. Demographics, technologies, healthcare priorities have all combined to make this segment grow. So again, in this simplified example, 3 factors with a shared effect are combined, and in this case, they create a validated opportunity that is validated by the CLAL rules. Now, once you've done that synthesis, you can begin the alignment process. The alignment looks for ways strengths might be able to exploit opportunities in this example, and it's aiming to find out what critical alignment issue might be needed to allow that exploitation. So in this simplified example here of strength to opportunity alignment, our example of a synthesized strength in contextual segment X aligns with the opportunity of a growing segment X to say that to provide a critical alignment issue of any strong strategy in this market will focus our resources onto contextual segment X. That's the critical alignment issue, one of them in this case. It's a simplified example, of course, because I'm trying to illustrate the point. The same goes for weakness to threat mitigation. And here we're looking for the critical alignment issues that are needed to allow mitigation of a threat against one of our weaknesses. So in this simple example, we have a combination of weaknesses that make us unable to compete strongly in segment Y, and a combination of threats that threaten to exacerbate that weakness. And the alignment issue reveals a critical alignment issue of any strong strategy will either withdraw resources from contextual segment Y or perhaps try to fix the weaknesses that we're talking about. Those were just simplified examples, of course. In reality, in a typical good SWOT alignment, you might expect 6 to 10 alignments and between strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and therefore an output of 6 to 10 critical alignment issues. The balance between exploitation alignment issues and mitigation alignment issues doesn't need to be exactly even, but it's usually quite even. So the end result is a good SWOT is 6 to 10 critical alignment issues, each of which is a statement about how your strategy should enable exploitation of opportunities by your strengths or mitigate your weaknesses in the face of market threats, or sometimes correct those weaknesses. So there's the answer to how you do SWOT alignment. You do your internal and external analyses, you validate your strengths and weaknesses, you then synthesize them and you align them. And you get, as an output, 6 to 10 unambiguous, relevant, clear, and case-specific critical alignment issues that are then used to guide your strategy. The process is simple in principle, and obviously I've simplified it to explain this today. But in practice, it requires a skilled and trained team, just like any business capability. Now, I'm now going to move on to what we do with those outputs that come out of the SWOT. The critical alignment issues are just one set of inputs that you use for creating a strategy. The other is the output of another tool called the focus matrix. The focus matrix guides what kind of resources you should allocate and where you should allocate them. If you're not familiar with it as a tool, again, it's in the book, or please talk to me outside of this masterclass. When you combine the outputs of both analyses, SWOT and focus matrix, it tends to make very clear what your strategy needs to do. You generally don't have much of a choice. It directs you very strongly. Now, this putative, this initial definition of strategy is then tested using the strategy diagnostic test that I discussed earlier, and the strategy is then reiterated and improved until it is as strong as you can make it against these tests. Another useful tool to use here is Drucker's definition of strategy, which helps you structure the wording of strategy effectively and makes it easier to formulate strategy. Again, if you're not familiar with that tool, then please find it in the book or get in touch and I'll explain it to you. Obviously, once you have a well-defined tested strategy, then of course the strategy is used to guide the development of action plans, metrics, and so on. Incidentally, the 4 C's and the 3 L that this diagram refers to, they are tools and techniques from my other work that I will explain in the book that we don't have time to cover here, but I'll gladly explain them to you offline if you want me to. So there's the answer to what we do after we've done SWOT. We use it to define strategy with the help of other tools like focus matrix and strategy diagnostics and Drucker's definition. So hopefully now I've answered all of your 3 questions to your satisfaction. So I'm going to close by asking you a question. Do you think your SWOT process is as good as it could be? This slide here summarizes the differences between best practice and typical practice when doing SWOT in pharma and medtech. Which of these two boxes do you think best describes what you do now? Do you use reality filters? Do you synthesize factors? Do you do all of the prior analysis? And so on. If you think that you are more to the left than to the right, then don't be disheartened. That's a good thing, because what we've just done then is identified an area where your marketing team can improve their capabilities and add value to the company. Importantly, don't think for a moment that SWOT needs you to have loads more information or loads more resources or loads more people. Generally speaking, in my experience, improving the SWOT process doesn't need all of those things. It simply needs your existing information, capabilities, people, processes to be used more effectively. And so in that sense, it's low-hanging fruit for how you improve your strategy. Again, if you want to talk to me about how to do that in practice, then I'd be delighted to hear from you. So that's really all I've got to say today. If you enjoyed the masterclass, then please mention it on LinkedIn and Twitter. Please like it and subscribe. I hope you'll watch some of the other masterclasses too. And if you'd like to know more about how to apply these ideas in practice in your company, then please get in touch with me and I'll explain how you may do that. I'm always happy to talk to people who, like me, love our industry. Thank you very much for listening.